Danny and I had been running a 3rd Street gym, a fitness center, and we had no clue what the hell we were doing. We're putting up the sign for Performance Quest, and we spelled performance wrong. We left the letter out. I wasn't sure if I wanted to pee myself and run, climb over that fence and get the hell out of there, or stand in there, fight. It was different back then. I didn't see or know who I was fighting until I stepped on the scale.
Were they around the same size as you? Or?
No, they were huge. 290 and 300 pounds. So I'm like, what the hell did I get myself into here? I had a fight scene with Jet Li in that movie. One line, let's go chicken shit.
Let's go chicken shit. Not today.
So I'm supposed to throw a big right hand at him and he just dodges it. But he didn't get out of the way.
Oh, you hit him.
I didn't hit him, thank God, but I ran him over. The director went ape.
Oh, I bet.
Here's this big knucklehead just ran over the star of the movie.
What's up, guys? Welcome to Verse Us with Eric Nicksick. He is Eric Nicksick. I am Randy Fainrich, and this is Verse Us. And today we finally kick off season 2 after a brief break, and we couldn't kick it off with a better guest that we have here joined to my right. He is one of the forefathers of MMA, a legend in every sense of the word, the first 2-division UFC champion, a 3-time Division I NCAA All-American wrestler, an Olympian, a veteran, an actor, the original Captain America, the natural Randy Couture. Welcome to the show.
My guy.
Had to give you like a great intro, man. You are the best.
Makes you sound old, man.
Really appreciate you coming on. We're super excited to have you, and thank you for kicking off season 2 for us.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. I want to start. Eric and I were just talking off camera before we get into everything, and go back a couple weeks to the Battle of the Giants with PFL, and obviously Francis, trains with Eric. Eric is his head coach, trains at Extreme Couture. You've known him for quite some time. Mm-hmm. I just kind of want to talk about that whole experience, and I'll kick it off to you guys to go back and forth. But, what was that like after everything Francis had been through? He had been in your gym for so long. Just kind of talk about maybe, some of the conversations you had with Eric and with Francis kind of leading into that fight.
Yeah, I mean, it was an emotional night. I don't think, the team really kind of got a chance to surround Francis and find some closure after Kobe. And when you guys lost it in the cage, I kind of lost it in the booth. And then that spread to Dan and Sean. They're looking at me like, oh, no, he's going to lose it here. It was obviously an amazing performance, especially under the circumstances with everything that he's been dealing with. And I don't think you'd wish that on anybody who's ever had kids. It's not something a parent should have to go through. But amazing night, top to bottom. I mean, the fights were fantastic. Chris Cyborg did an amazing job in that fight, and that was great with Larissa. I was very proud of Larissa's performance. She showed that she deserved to be there, and she was in that fight from top to bottom. They just do a great job, really. Take care of us like kings over there. Mm-hmm. They're happy. We're genuinely happy that we're there, and they want to see more opportunity for the citizens of that nation, developing and using the largest sovereign hedge fund in the world to create some culture and create some opportunities. Yeah. Things have changed there. It was a lot different than I expected. Yeah, but it's been pretty cool. Headed back for the finals here next week. Right.
Yeah, next week heading back to Riyadh. But Eric, can you just talk also about that whole? I know you've talked at length about the whole experience from the beginning, but just that week and that camp and leading up to that and leaning on someone like Randy who's been in the gym with you.
Well, I think, Randy hit it on the head, man. It was just like, it wasn't necessarily closure, but it was like we did kind of what we wanted to accomplish in the regards of, I wasn't sure if Francis was ever going to fight again after that. And then him making this kind of stance, if you will, and I liked his motivation, was like, I don't want the death of Kobe to be the reason why I don't fight anymore. I don't want to put that on my son. That wasn't his choice. Mm-hmm. I never thought of it from that perspective, right? But it was a goal that we didn't really have to speak too much about. Like, we all knew inside, right? We all knew what our motivations were and how we wanted to capitalize on it. So once it was over, I've never ever hopped over a cage in my life. right? And it was like once he won, bro, Dewey's like, I never seen a white boy jump so high. Bro, I was gone. I was over the cage like I was a 16-year-old kid.
Yeah.
And like it was just this, like what Randy was saying, it was like this emotion of like, man, I just wanted to hug him. That was the only thing I kept thinking of. I just want to hug him and make sure that he's okay, because I knew that rush of emotion was going to get there. And not to like downgrade the fact that we won a world title, but that felt like it was like secondary, bro. Like we didn't even take a picture with the belt even. It was like we cared about it, of course, like, but none of our driving focus like it was with Stipe or Gon. It was to win the belt, to defend the belt, and the belt, and this is all about Kobe.
Was there like a moment where, you know, maybe obviously you work for PFL, so you're not partial to either side, but are there moments where like you're kind of leaning on Randy for advice, not necessarily strategic advice in the fight, but just like, just overall to kind of help you navigate, that?
He's honestly my cheat code in a lot of ways, because this is I'll go back years ago. I can't remember which fight it was, but I remember like thinking I need to talk to Randy about something, whatever it was. And then because we lost like a close split decision, and I was so upset, and the first person I thought to call was Randy, and then I talked to him for like 30 minutes about some things, and then he actually calmed me down, but it was more about giving me an other side of perspective about what we could have done better. It wasn't like just defending me, but he was also teaching me about some things. So when I got out of that conversation with him, it was more about accountability. He's like, well, in topside half guard, you got it was Roy Nelson versus Derek Lewis. Now I remember the fight. He's like, you guys could have done this a little bit more, and that would have helped score this a little bit better, and da-da-da-da. So I remember like hanging up the phone and going like, oh, dude, I got the ultimate cheat code as my mentor. So like I would lean on him more and more and more. So sometimes I'll formulate a game plan, or I'll think of a game plan, and then a lot of times I'll just text Randy and be like, hey, here's what I'm thinking. Is there anything that you think I'm missing? And he'll be like, nope, I think that's good. So like when this fight, I text him right away. I was like, hey boss, here's what I'm thinking, about the ground. And I know that he's an analyst, and I know that he works for the PFL, but he's also like my big brother. So I don't feel like I'm taking advantage of anything or putting him in a bad spot. But it's not necessarily him giving me insight. It's him kind of reassuring what I'm already seeing,
right,
if you will. Yeah. And that was exactly what I wrote him.
Yeah. Yeah. We definitely were on the same page going into this one. I felt like I had a cheat sheet as well, standing in the booth. I kind of knew where we were headed. And I don't think anybody really expected that, which was kind of fun.
Maybe the inner circle only. Speaking of like his wrestling in that fight, like, France has been in Extreme Couture now, I don't know, 5 years, 6 years, whatever it's been. Are you on the mats ever with him? Like, do you ever help?
Once. It was an experience.
How was that?
It was for the documentary that the PFL did in 2020, because they took that season off. They didn't kind of want to fumble around with everything locked down and try and pull off a season, and I think that was wise. So they launched a production company instead, and then of course approached me about doing that 4-part documentary, and they said, hey, can you get on the mats with the guys on one of the days? And it happened to be a Wednesday, so it was a wrestling day anyway. I think we had little gloves on, but man, first 2 goes were great. Smaller guys. It felt good. And then that third go, here's Francis. I'm like, oh, God, here we go. He blasted me with a double, man. I haven't been blasted like that in forever. Sun disappeared. The whole 5 minutes I was on the bottom, just like, oh, this is going to look great.
Do you have any athletes in the gym that ever hit you up specifically for advice just on the side, or do they kind of all go through the
here
coaches,
and there?
or?
Yeah. That we I'm walking through the gym. If I'm in Vegas, I'm usually walking through the gym at some point every day. And some of the guys will talk to me. What do you think about this fight? What did you think about that? What do you think about my approach to solving the problems that this guy poses? And you get to engage in some of those those conversations with some of the guys here and there. I think some of the guys are a little scared. They're a little intimidated, like they're bothering me if they stop me. And that's what I love to do.
Right.
So.
Let's talk about your kind of like upbringing. Was martial arts always in the picture? Like, how did you get started into martial arts? Was it always wrestling?
Yeah, never martial arts. I never did a more traditional martial art ever. I always wanted to box, and my mom forbid me.
Really?
We laugh about it now, but I should have just let you do it then. You'd have got it out of your system. But I was sneaking away to the Linwood Elks Club, to the boxing club there. Robert Shannon was an '84 Olympian, and medalist, was from my area. I knew him because he was also a wrestler. He wrestled at Briar Junior High School when I was at Alderwood Junior High School.
And that's it. You're from the Pacific
so
Northwest, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Up in Seattle, north of Seattle.
Everett, right?
Linwood. Yeah, I was born in Everett. And grew up in the Linwood area. The mean streets of Linwood, as Chael would put it.
Yeah. Because they had PFL, I think it might have been PFL or World Series.
That was up in Everett, yeah.
Yeah, they had an event there.
It was in the rebranding year.
Yeah. So we were out like at, I don't know, we were doing something, and he's like, oh, there's the elementary school I went to. Oh. Yeah, it's like all around the corner right there.
Wow.
Yeah.
So just wrestling
wrestling.
From middle school?
My best friend at that time was Bobby Stevenson. I grew up playing soccer with him, and his brothers both wrestled in the junior high program. Mm-hmm. And the junior high coach, Coach K-Spear, was very smart. He would have the elementary kids bust over for a wrestling class to generate interest in his junior high school wrestling program. Well, I did that. And then we went to watch Bobby's brothers wrestle in the district meet, and they had a novice division. And his brothers threw me and Bobby in the novice division just for shits and giggles. I got
throw you in the deep
end.
Pinned a
kid with a headlock. I got my first bloody nose, and I had no idea how to wrestle. We had no idea what we were doing. But the coach remembered me, and he said, "Hey, wrestling starts next week." You know, when I rolled into 7th grade a year later. So I've been wrestling since 7th grade.
Wow.
And, you know, in many ways that has achieved martial arts status now because of MMA.
Mm-hmm, right.
But back then, nobody thought of wrestling, you know, that was the redheaded stepchild in the sports world in many ways.
Yeah. And then when you wrestled when you were in the military as well? After high school? How did that work?
I got married at 18. I had a kid on the way. That's Ryan.
Yep.
And had to support a family. So I'd already sold my car to go to college and I walked on at Washington State, and then didn't make the team, came home for Thanksgiving. The rest of the team went on the tournament. I came home for Thanksgiving. I'm getting a call 3 weeks later, hey, I'm having a baby. You're in or out? And of course I was in, and then I had to figure out how to support a family. So I thought wrestling was done for me. Little did I know, the Army, you know, had very strong combative sports programs. Wrestling and boxing were big. Got trained as an air traffic controller, went to basic training at Fort Bliss, Texas, and then my first duty station was Hanau, West Germany.
Oh, wow.
In 1982.
Yeah.
5 million soldiers stationed in Central Europe at that time. And so the sports programs were big for morale. Mm-hmm. And I ended up back on a wrestling mat. And ultimately made the All-Army Wrestling team, qualified for the Inter-Service Championship, won a couple Inter-Service Championships. That qualified me for the Olympic trials, and basically I was an alternate on the 88 Olympic team as a soldier.
That's crazy. So you basically fell into all this stuff, it sounds like.
Yep.
That you weren't really pursuing it.
Somehow it worked out.
I read something real quick that you originally went to do like freestyle wrestling, but you signed up for the wrong thing. And what was that story?
Yeah, that was an interesting story. I was going to all these wrestling tournaments with the community team. I was in Hanau, West Germany, and we had a community wrestling team. Some lieutenant saw me lifting in the gym. Was like, "Oh, you were a wrestler? I didn't have the cauliflower ears yet."
Yeah.
I said, "Yeah, man, I was a state champion my senior year." And he said, "Well, wrestling practice starts, you know." So here I am on this base team, basically traveling around Germany, wrestling in tournaments every weekend. Yeah. Well, one of those tournaments was the 5th Corps tournament that qualified you for the European Theater Championship. And I signed up for freestyle. I'd never wrestled freestyle or Greco until this time. Right. But I signed up for the freestyle because it's most closely technically related to collegiate wrestling, to folk style, which is what I'd done in school. And they somehow put me on the Greco bracket as well. So I just walked off the mat, finished the freestyle match, and they're calling my name back on another mat. And I'm like, how the hell can that be? And then I realized as I'm walking over there that it's a Greco match. It's not a freestyle match. And I'm like, and they're just like, well, you gonna wrestle or not? And I'm like, all right,
I'm in.
Yeah. What's the biggest difference? In that?
Freestyle wrestling, you're allowed to grab the legs. Single legs, double legs, high crotches, fireman's carries, all those things that you're used to seeing in collegiate wrestling. Greco is much more upright posture. It's like judo without the gi.
I didn't get these playing badminton. This hand is going to go from here to that knee. Mom told you to use your head, right? Use my head.
And all the holds take place in Greco from the waist up. You're not allowed to trip grab legs or grab anything below
So
the
everything's
waist.
like throws?
So it's
Yeah.
way more throw-oriented, arm throws, slide-bys. You're still taking guys down and trying to turn them, the same rules of engagement, so to speak, as freestyle.
Right.
But that's one of the two Olympic styles, is Greco and
Which I feel like Greco has translated very well for MMA
Yes.
over the years, the way
Yeah.
he's kind of evolved it, right? Like Greco, and it avoids a lot of conflict with guillotines and things like that because you're all chest to chest.
Yeah, because of the more upright posture of Greco and our infighting and ability to dirty box, basically fight against the barrier and hold and punch and all that. Greco is one of the two styles I think that directly translates to mixed martial arts very, very well. We didn't know that until
Right.
me, Danny, and Matt Lindeland started making that transition.
Yeah.
And then there was all these similarities and things, especially blew my mind with Muay Thai.
Yeah.
Their
Right.
plumb and off balance and the way they use their hips was absolutely straight from Greco-Roman wrestling, which blew my mind.
Right. So, and correct me if I'm wrong, but when they used to announce you, Bruce or whomever, it would be like a Greco-Roman wrestler. But
Yeah.
then, like, you were never really a Greco-Roman. You just
didn't
happened
order
to
the salmon.
Yeah,
They said
you just
boxing
happened to
in
fall
that very first one, UFC 13. I fought twice that night, and they said, "Oh, extensive boxing training in the Army." I'm like, "What? Extensive boxing training?"
Wait till you
But
see this shit.
Jeff Gladnick obviously was very associated with the UFC back in the early
Right.
days as a commentator and,
Yeah.
and a figurehead and a brand ambassador in many ways because he was that gold medalist in Greco-Roman wrestling, the same style
Right.
that I kind of came from. So we knew each other very well.
Yeah.
So Okie State was right after the Army?
So the Army and making that 88 Olympic team as an alternate got all these college coaches' attention. Like, who the heck is that kid?
Wow.
Where did he come from? That particular, my last 2 years on the Army team, I was stationed at Fort Campbell, Kentucky. There's not much international wrestling in the fall, but all the college tournaments start up. So UT Chattanooga put on an open, college open tournament every year, the Southern Open. So I'm stationed right there. So our team didn't have anything to do. So we went to that college open 2 years in a row. And I won it at 190 pounds 2 years in a row. So all these
far-
college coaches are like, who the hell is this
Yeah.
kid?
We're 20 years into your life so far. You've stumbled into every single thing.
Yeah.
that
You
you have done.
absolutely the truth.
So you won the Southern Open, and then
I won that twice,
Yeah.
2 years in a row. And again, the phone started ringing.
Yeah.
You know, hey, this kid, never really matriculated, so he's got 4 years of eligibility. He just whipped the hell out of my 190 pounder. We want you to come. So Southern Illinois at Edwardsville, Larry Kristoff, he started calling. Clemson, Okie State, Bakersfield, all these colleges started calling to try and get me to, what was I going to do? Was I going to stay in the Army and keep doing what I was doing, or was I going to get out and
2 years in the
pursue I was in 6 years.
Oh, shit.
Yeah.
Okay, so you got
Yeah,
out.
I extended. I signed for 4 and then extended to make that 88 Olympic trials because I was basically chasing my dream wearing that uniform.
That's so cool.
So you were there 84 to 90?
I was in 82 to 88.
82 to 88, okay. And then so you go to Oklahoma State. Obviously
Yeah.
you choose.
Yeah. Coach Chesbrough calls me collect at my apartment at Fort Campbell, Kentucky. I answer the phone. Hey, we receive a collect call from Coach Chesbrough. And I'm like, what the heck? And he was at camp. It was the only way he could reach me and set up that visit to Oklahoma State. And that I had just come up short making that Olympic team in 1988, that summer. So now I roll in on my recruiting visit in July. The team, a big portion of the freestyle team was literally training on those mats at Oklahoma State. And I'm standing there watching all these guys I knew, Kenny Monday, John Smith, all these guys. I'm like, oh, this is the right place for me, for sure.
Nice.
And that really sealed the deal for me. I signed.
And Trig was a teammate of yours, right?
Trig was a teammate of mine. I think it was my sophomore year. He was a freshman on the team that year.
Wow.
And that's where we met and established our friendship and kind of the foundation for our relationship.
Trig's awesome.
Yeah. Did you? I was going to ask, like,
Twinkle toes.
you were there for
Twinkle
4
toes.
years.
I wrestled there for 4 years. Yeah.
Did you? I was going to say, like, did you have notable opponents or teammates? Obviously, Trig, one of them, like that we would know today.
Well, obviously, Kenny Monday, who was an Olympic gold medalist, was one of my mentors and coaches. John Smith was around, and then eventually John became our head coach by the time I was a senior. And that was his first year coaching at Oklahoma State. He just retired last year after 33 years of coaching.
Wow.
Arguably one of the best wrestlers that's ever come out of this country, a 6-time world champion. 2 of those were Olympic gold medals.
Damn.
Yeah, amazing guy. and again, honored and happy to have been able to rub elbows with guys like that.
Yeah,
And
of course.
I think I developed the confidence in the Army that I could compete at that level. I had never competed at that level. And then when I rolled into Oklahoma State, I developed the confidence that I could not just compete but win at that level.
Yeah. So what happens after Oklahoma State? Is that when UFC calls, or you go back to
the
the Pacific
got hired
Northwest? Or?
to be an assistant wrestling coach at Oregon State University right out of college. I think Coach Wells, Joe Wells, was the assistant coach at Michigan my senior year. And then that job opened up at Oregon State. Saw the opening, submitted a resume, and Coach Wells reached out to me. He liked the fact that I was still competing because I was going to be the assistant coach. That meant I was going to be wrestling with all those guys on the team.
Yeah.
And that was a very forward-thinking thing. He came up with, no, this is the kind of guys I want as my assistant coaches that are still on the mat, still grinding it out. So, we had an amazing team. He had recruited. Mark Johnson was the coach that was there before him, and he had kind of started this recruiting class. Was an amazing recruiter, and myself and Coach Wells were the beneficiaries of those recruiting classes. And then we tried to expound and build on those athletes. I mean, Les Gutches, Chad Renner, Chad Flack, the Perlers were at Oklahoma State. We had the Radka twins. Jake and Josh, Wiesenhunt, another set of twins that were amazing. Babak Mohammadi, 4-time All-American for us. I mean, we took 2nd and 4th at the NCAAs in that 6-year, 7-year stretch that I was at Oklahoma State.
So we finally found the first thing you actually wanted to do,
Yeah,
which is coach at Oregon State.
I didn't come into it backwards.
Yes, exactly.
But yeah, I loved coaching. I loved being there and being part of that program, and still friends with some of those athletes to this day. It was a great experience for me, and I didn't realize how much coaching and what my Army coach was doing and what my collegiate coach was doing by putting me out there in the summers at summer camps and making me stand in front of these other kids and pass on the things that I was learning from the sport. And I don't think until you break it down, you really understand how it is you do what you do. And coaching forces you to analyze that, to hand that off to somebody else and allow them to understand it, potentially make it their own. You got to be able to break that down pretty well. And that means you have to analyze it and understand how to translate that.
That's what people say, right? Like, coach, if you're in a specific field, coaching that field will help you understand your job even better.
Absolutely the truth. And so I feel fortunate that inadvertently was pushed into those situations that ultimately I think made me a better athlete and gave me some of the longevity that I was able to enjoy.
Definitely.
What's the time period? So Oregon State, and then when did you guys start Quest?
Team Quest started in 2000.
Okay.
Danny Henderson had moved up to Oregon. We were kind of doing an exchange thing. We didn't start fighting until 97. Both of us started at the same time.
Right.
I was still coaching at Oregon State, so we're using the OSU mats and then going to the JKD gym and some jiu-jitsu schools trying to find
So
other
you were
partners.
just spot piecing together camps.
And then I was sponsored by 24 Hour Fitness, so we're doing our strength and conditioning at 24 Hour Fitness. And just kind of running all over the place to find all the modalities. There was no such thing as an MMA gym back then.
Yeah.
And so, Matt Linland had been coaching at Nebraska going into the 2000 games. He made that team. He won his silver medal. And then he left his coaching position and came back to Oregon. And when he came back to Oregon, Danny and I had been running a 3rd Street gym, a fitness center, and we had no clue what the hell we were doing. We're putting up the sign for Performance Quest, and we spelled performance wrong. We left the letter out. Of course, my wife at the time is the one that recognizes that we've spelled the sign wrong. That's exactly the kind of shenanigans that were going on at the 3rd Street gym.
Ryan saw it before anybody else.
Yeah, it was crazy. But so the only part of the gym that was flourishing with Danny and I running it was the wrestling room, the mat room. We took, the aerobics room, put our mats in there with the mirrors. We start breaking mirrors pretty much instantly. But
you put mirrors surrounding the wrestling.
Well, they were already in there. We just didn't take them down, and we did
blast double-legged.
Take them down.
Butt print or a head print in every mirror in the room.
Oh shit.
But so Danny and I are recognizing very quickly we have no idea how to run a gym and make it profitable. So we're in the rears for some rent and stuff, and we have all this equipment that we've leased. And so we start auctioning off all the equipment, and we're going to close the doors to the gym. And at the same time, Matt is moving back to Gresham, to Oregon, and him and Joel Supernaut are opening a car dealership called USA Auto. And there's a van conversion center in the back of this car dealership. This is garage space, basically. And they're like, man, why don't you move the mats over here? You know, we'll start doing practice and training here. That was the only part of our gym that basically flourished, was the mat room. So that's how Team Quest was born.
So you'd already had some fights in the UFC then.
I was fighting in the UFC. Danny was fighting. You know, I had fought in Brazil. And
so when was your first fight? 97?
April of 97.
In the UFC?
Yeah, my very first UFC.
So you were pre-Zuffa.
UFC 13, and I was supposed to go to Brazil that summer and fight in a Brazil Open fight. Danny and me and Danny were both scheduled to go.
Yeah.
I was going to fight in the heavyweight division. He was going to be in the lightweight division. And then I ended up getting UFC 13. So I took that opportunity. They sent Tom Erickson down there in my place, and he ended up winning that tournament.
Crazy.
Division. And Danny won his division as well.
Can we tell the story with you and Dan on the road and at the bar, and the guys picked a fight with you guys?
Wait, what was it? Was this around the same time?
95.
Okay, this is before UFC?
Yeah, no, it was before UFC, yes.
Yeah.
I didn't fight in UFC till 97, but in 95, they held the World Championships for freestyle in Atlanta and the Greco-Roman World Team Trials all at the same time. It was kind of the precursor to the 96 Games, which are happening a year later.
Right.
So they wanted to hold this big tournament there as kind of get all the kinks out before we throw a tournament during the Olympics, was kind of the idea. So me and Danny both wrestled in the Greco trials and both made that team in 95. And we stayed over the weekend to watch the freestyle world championships. Our team was competing. Angle was on that team. That was, we had a really, really good team. Mark Kerr was wrestling back then. Him
That's
and Angle.
crazy, man.
Yep.
All these people that are just legends.
Oh yeah.
On one team.
So Danny and I stayed after we both made the world team that Thursday. We stayed through the weekend to watch the world championships in freestyle. So now we're partying. We're celebrating. We just made the world team. We're out in Buckhead on Friday night, late, and we're walking back to our vehicle to go back to our hotel. I'm lagging behind. I stopped to tie my shoe and put my hand on this car to bend over. And next thing I know, 4 bouncers pop out of this doorway right between, and the guys had kept walking.
Yeah.
So I'm behind them 20 yards. Hey, don't touch that car. I'm like, I was just tying my shoe, dude.
Yeah.
And then one dude's got a bat.
Oh shit.
And I don't know why, but I locked on to the dude with the bat. So they come out between us. I'm here. Danny and the other 2 guys are down there.
Yeah.
They turn around when these guys yell, and I'm, so they're in between us, and we're both kind of converge to these bouncers, and this dude just locked and loaded with the bat, and I'm like, dude, what's with the bat? and I couldn't get it out of my head. I was like, what's with the bat? I just kept saying it over and over, and finally I just snatched the bat from him, and he takes off, threw back in the club.
Oh, he left.
So I'm
He didn't have his
chasing this
weapon?
dude with a bat through this club. I never caught him. I just throw the bat down and I come back out. Well, I come back out, Danny's got a kid in the middle of the street in a headlock, just wearing his butt out, no shirt on. I'm like, dude, where'd your shirt go? This poor security guard comes running up, and here's, the other 2 guys each have a bouncer too. These bouncers are getting their money's worth. And we just get up, and like this guy was shaking so bad. All he had was a flashlight and a radio. Poor kid. And he's shaking so bad, and we're just looking at him, and we're just like, I guess it's time to go. We walk off.
But I always wonder like what the other side of that story sounds like now.
Right.
With these 4 bouncers going, dude, we got our asses kicked by Randy Couture.
And Dan Henderson.
So, like 10 years later.
So this time, I'm on the board of directors as an athlete's rep for USA Wrestling. And on Saturday, they're having a board meeting because the World Championships and all this stuff are there. All the board directors and everybody's there. So I'm hungover as hell, but I go to this luncheon. And then after the luncheon, all the board members are like, oh, come on, we're going to go out. And so we end up, and I'm like, I am hungover bad.
Yeah.
So I'm just standing. I'm not drinking. I'm not doing anything. We've had lunch. I'm standing in this bar, basically minding my own business, listening to music. And the next thing I know, I got 2 cops and 2 bouncers in my face. And I'm like, you're out of here. I'm like, I'm out of here. Well, I haven't done a thing. What's going on?
Yet.
Little did I know, I was standing in the same bar I chased a kid through with a bat the night before.
Plot twist.
That's how bad I was. I had no idea I was in the same place.
Oh,
That's awesome, man.
That's so funny.
So
yeah.
the cast of characters of Team Quest, like,
Oh, Lord.
just outlaws and renegades, huh?
Yep, absolutely.
Was this-
from,
do you
from
think-
Linland on down
Chael,
the line?
Levin,
Eddie Herman,
Dennis.
Dennis Davis, Evan Tanner, Benji Raddick. So starting to call names of guys that aren't even here with us anymore.
Right.
It's
Nate
crazy.
Corey.
Yeah, Nate Corey.
Schultz.
Yeah, Ryan Schultz. I mean, we had a ridiculous room back then. It really was. You could have sold popcorn to those workouts. It was remarkable. Jeff Munson was coming down. All these guys were coming down from Southern Washington. Dennis and just a whole bunch of those guys.
So essentially, you guys were the first real American MMA gym
So I was just gonna say.
that I can remember of, like, dude, I remember the first time I ever had a Team Quest sweatshirt, it was a hand-me-down from him, but it was like, oh, dude, like, this was the legend gym of America at the time, right? There was, like, Militich.
Yeah,
and then there
Military
was-
Fighting Systems, Lions Den with Ken Shamrock. The very first Lions Den, or 2 Lions Dens were going, and then Team Quest. I mean, that was the origin of what a mixed martial arts gym was. Is that gym and those gyms, those guys, and we had great relationships with those guys. Very competitive relationships
Sure.
because we were all striving for the same thing, to see the sport continue to flourish and be accepted. And it was a crazy time. It really was.
Can you talk a little bit about Lin, just some of the, like, how competitive and how cutthroat that guy was?
Matt is a junkyard dog. That's how we always described him. He was just, there was nothing pretty about anything Matt was going to do, and you better have your shit strapped on tight, because he's coming. He's just one of those guys that just had that tenacious.
Easy rounds with
He grew
him.
up wrestling up there in Clackamas Community College. USA Oregon was a very, very popular. If you talk to a lot of guys from my era, for sure, Peninsula and USA Oregon, kids used to come from all over the country to wrestle in these clubs with Sprague and a lot of these guys, and a bunch of amazing wrestlers came out of those clubs in that area in Oregon. It was a great place, and we just had, it was a crazy time.
Dude, I couldn't imagine.
Yeah.
Couldn't imagine.
Like Wild Wild West.
Yeah.
So how many of you? So 97, you said you make your. Was that your MMA debut too,
Yes.
or just UFC?
MMA debut.
It was. And how many of the guys on that team were fighting at that time? Just you
The
and
team
Dan?
didn't exist yet. Danny and I were fighting for the Raw team, Real American Wrestling, under Rico Chiapparelli.
Oh,
that
okay.
year.
So the team came after.
Didn't come till 2000.
2000.
Until Matt made the 2000 games
right. He said that.
and wrestled in those Olympics, and that's when he left Nebraska and came back to the Gresham, Oregon area where he grew up, and that was the impetus. We were still trying to make. Those guys were still wrestling and
Right.
competing, so that's what drew us all together to Oregon.
You fought a heavyweight your first UFC fight. How much did you weigh?
First half of my career, I walked around at 215, 217, right around there.
For heavyweight. And who was your first opponent?
I fought twice that night. I fought Tony Hollema and Stephen Graham in the heavyweight tournament. Yeah.
Wow. What do you remember about that night? Like just that whole experience.
I wasn't sure if I wanted to pee myself and run, climb over that fence and get the hell out of there, or standing there fight. I hadn't, it was different back then. I hadn't seen those guys. It wasn't like I was able to study footage or prepare myself. I didn't see or know who I was fighting until I stepped on the scale.
Were they
in
around the
lobby.
same size as you? Or?
No, they were huge. 290 and 300 pounds.
Stop.
Yeah,
And you're
so I'm like,
215?
what the hell did I get
Holy
myself into
shit.
here?
Yeah.
But I stayed calm, and Rico had a sense of how wrestling fit into MMA. Rico was a very, very smart guy. This bohemian, literally half the time he was living out of his car.
Right.
at the same time a GQ model. I mean, this guy's literally on magazine covers, and he pulls his tooth out and wears his sweatpants. Nobody would ever know. He was a really, really interesting cat, and a very, very smart guy. He wrestled at Iowa, national champ for Iowa, and a pinner, a very technical, that kind of a wrestler. So could immediately see, first of all, how wrestling fit into this MMA world and that we could make a mark there. He was the first guy that ever pitched me that way about wrestling and how wrestlers fit into the sport. And then technically he understood too. He started educating me immediately before that first UFC 13, what the guard was and going on jiu-jitsu mats and trying to find jiu-jitsu practitioners that would roll with us. And nobody would roll with us.
They didn't want to give the
they didn't,
secrets away.
Right. Well, we might have to fight you down the road. That was a much more closed mindset back then.
Wow.
John Donahue, one of the first black belts that we found that would train with us. Eric Paulson. One of the first black belts that wanted to learn the wrestling and was willing to get on the mats and take the heat from the jits community for working with us.
Was there a difference because he was catch, or did it matter?
Catch hadn't started in his mind yet, at least. I don't remember him mentioning catch wrestling until much, much later in his journey. But, man, his lock flows, and that took me to Inosanto Academy and meeting Dan Inosanto and so many of these martial arts legends that I'd never been exposed to as a wrestler. And, again, I think wrestling was striving towards gaining martial arts status through this process because we were going to go out in those cages and have success. And everybody's like, well, where the hell did this guy come from?
Man. So when did you started at heavyweight and then you went to light heavyweight? What did you like fighting at better? What weight? Because you were always like a lighter heavyweight, right?
My first UFC was UFC 13, and that was the first show there was a lightweight division. There was only heavyweights. There was only one division. And then UFC 13, they brought in lightweights, which was anybody under 200 pounds. That was Tito's first show. He ended up in the fight in the finals as the alternate because Royce Alger broke his orbit against Ensign Inoue. So Ensign won the fight but couldn't compete because of the fractured orbit. Or maybe it was the other way around. Hoist won and Hoist couldn't compete. So Tito was the alternate. He got to fill that spot. He fights Guy Metzger.
Oh, that's right.
And gets caught in a guillotine. He was winning the fight. Had Guy cut. They stopped the fight to check Guy's cut. They start him back on their feet in the open. Tito takes a crappy shot, gets caught in the guillotine, and loses.
Chokes
after
out.
he's winning. That comes up after he loses with the double bird to Ken, and that's what started that whole beef that culminated in their 3 fights. Was that night
crazy
in UFC 13. Yeah.
Damn. When did you start to notice that like MMA or the UFC or you guys were gaining momentum with like the public audience?
Honestly, I obviously had my rhubarbs with the owners, the old owners, SCG and Bob Meyerowitz. Immediately, I won my third show, my fourth fight. I beat Mo Smith for the heavyweight championship. I'm like, what the hell just happened? 3 shows, and now I'm the world champion in this sport. This is crazy. And we had negotiated as their new champ a contract for 3 fights, and then came time to fight and defend that title against Mark Coleman. And they're like, oh, well, we're having trouble with People's Choice, and Senator McCain is publicly speaking out and bashing the sport and calling it human cockfighting. We're starting to lose money and sponsors now. People's Choice was the pay-per-view carrier. So now they don't have anywhere to show this sport on a pay-per-view carrier. The only place you could find it there for a while was online. And people and that hurt them financially. They weren't selling 350,000 pay-per-view buys per event. They were struggling financially. So that's when they put it up for sale, and they decided that they couldn't pay me what I had in black and white to pay me. So I'm like, well, I'm ready to defend the title and fight Mark Coleman, but not until you want to pay me what you're supposed to pay me.
Right.
And so we had this discord and disagreement over what the contract said, and they said, well, you choose not to defend your title, we're going to strip you, we're going to have a heavyweight tournament to crown a new heavyweight champion, and that gave them 3 shows, I think, through that heavyweight tournament. That's what brought Boss Rutten in. That's what started that whole thing and put Boss in the Kevin Randleman fight and Kosaka, and those were all the guys that ended up in that heavyweight tournament. I went back to wrestling, tried to make the 2000 team. going into those Sydney games. And then out of the Sydney games, Matt moved back to Oregon. Team Quest grew out in that next year. And that's when Dana White and company bought the brand from SCG in 2001.
Crazy.
Wow. The chain of events that leads to like the present day company
Right.
and sport is like it all started from like 97 to 2000.
Yeah,
You know what I
it's
mean?
wild.
So where are you fighting anywhere else outside UFC before you come back for the second run?
I fought in Japan. I fought in a Shuto. That was my first loss, was in Shuto against Ensign Inoue. He caught me in an armbar. Learned a lot from that experience. Then I fought in King of Kings. I started fighting in Japan in that space where I left the UFC and was still pursuing trying to make the 2000 Olympic team. Came up short in 2000 for the fourth time in the final match against Garrett Lowney. Lost to him 3-1. He went on and won a bronze medal in Sydney. He was a junior world champion that year. He was this young stud coming out of Minnesota. And I'm like, well, I'm not going another quadrennium. I'm not going to go another 4 years. It's time to retire. So I put my boots on the mat that day in Dallas at the trials and retired, walked away from wrestling. And then I was able to jump 100% into MMA. But I wasn't signed or with anybody.
Yeah.
And the UFC started calling me because Kevin was the heavyweight champ at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And Kevin was a very boisterous personality. They weren't getting along so great, let's just put it that way. And so they called me and said, hey, we want you to come back and fight for the heavyweight championship. Are you okay with that? I'm like, am I okay with that?
Yeah.
I'd love to do that. But I'm already fought in the first half of this KOK tournament. Hendo had won the KOK tournament the year before. It was a two-part tournament. And I got to fight in the next year. I'd already gotten through the semifinals, was scheduled to fight in the finals in January, and that was a $200,000 purse. That would have been the biggest purse I'd ever won.
Yeah.
So I was like, yeah, okay, I'll come back and fight for the UFC Heavyweight Championship. This was in October of 2000, but you have to let me compete in that
Finish
KOK
that.
final in January of 2001. And they said, okay, you can do that. So I fought Kevin in Atlantic City that fall. The fall, October of 2000, after the games and after retiring from wrestling.
Real quick, what was Japan like going over there? Any
Like
stories?
going to a foreign country
Yeah.
or another planet. You don't look like
Yeah.
anybody. You can't read anything.
Yeah.
Thank God for pictures on the menus. But I loved it.
Yeah.
They treat us amazingly. I mean, Bushido and the warrior spirit is highly revered in their culture.
Yeah.
So us as athletes over there get treated like kings. It's
And you were
fun
taking
stories?
Henderson most of the time, yeah?
yeah,
Like you and Dan were
cornered
always calling
Danny
each
and
other.
Matt over there
Yeah.
for a bunch of their fights. Matt's first UFC was in Japan.
Yeah.
Saw Chuck fight for the first time in that. I think that was Jeff Munson. He fought and kicked Jeff until Jeff's
That's
leg turned
right.
black and blue. I think that was the first time that was the first time I met Dana White, because Dana was managing Chuck and Tito
Oh,
at
that's
that
right,
time.
yeah.
And I was talking to him about managing me.
Yeah.
I was leaving Raw Team and things had kind of broke down between Lou and Rico and Danny and myself and some of the other guys on the Raw Team. And so I was looking for new management. I ended up signing with Peter Levin and Jeremy Lappin from Battle Management, and they signed Colma and Maurice Smith, a whole bunch of the top guys in the sport. Again, created the Real American Wrestling Team, and that's who but Jeremy and Peter created Battle Management, and again signed a bunch of those top guys. So I started going on casting calls with Rampage Jackson and Boss Rutan.
Yeah.
Talk about having a stomach ache from laughing
Yeah,
so
those two.
hard. Those guys were incredible. We'd go on all these crazy casting calls because our management believed the next action star was going to come out of the MMA world.
Yeah.
There was an authenticity and physicality to MMA athletes. We were largely misunderstood. People thought we were criminals.
Right, yeah.
I would walk into some of these casting calls and they were like, oh my God, you're one of those cage fighters?
Yeah.
Like somehow I'm going to jump over the table and bite them or something.
Right.
It was funny kind of how the Ultimate Fighter would either add to that mystique right? Like, or you would actually like meet some of these people and go, oh, like Rich Franklin was a math teacher, right? Or you know, they're like, oh, these are actually normal, educated, you know, college kids that are just going to compete, and there was like a Lieben,
you know,
but
you have the opposite ends of the spectrum.
Yeah, but I think that's what really for mainstream was the Ultimate Fighter that helped, I think, show the characters, if you will, of these fighters.
Yeah, I often wonder what you think about that, because you and Chuck had already had your rivalry going before the Ultimate Fighter, correct? Like, did you fight one or two?
Yeah, we fought in 2003, and then we started filming the Ultimate Fighter in 2004, and it started airing that spring of 2005. So I had already won the first fight against Chuck, and that was when Chuck and Tito was the champ, wouldn't step up for whatever reason, and there's some disparity. Is who do you believe?
Right.
According to Tito, they were friends and had an agreement that they would never fight each other. And Chuck said, that's BS. I wanted my crack at the title.
Right.
And we were friends and we used to train together, but I wanted my shot. So I don't know. That's neither here nor there. I had just come off my second loss in the heavyweight division. I lost to Rico Rodriguez. First loss was to Josh Barnett. That was the first guy to pop positive. That's 2000 when they first started testing.
But then they reinstated you or gave you the title back.
They wanted to give me the title back, and I'm like, no, man. In my mind, I still lost the title. It's like, you're not just going to hand me the belt back. It doesn't work like that in my mind. I don't think I'll fight for it. So they said, okay, we want you to fight Rico Rodriguez for the vacant title. And then I was winning that fight and caught that elbow in the 5th round and fractured my orbit. Probably the most serious injury I sustained in the 14 years that I was fighting. That was the only time my mom called me. Hey, time to think about doing something else. Oh, no, I'll be all right, Mom. I got more to do.
What was your kind of take? So actually, real quick before we get into that, were you and UFC already at odds at that point, or no?
We were pretty much at odds from the start.
Yeah.
Like I said, I was that December of 2000. I'd met with Dana White, was looking for new management in that time frame. He called me after we met. I'd already met with Battle Management and decided they were the right people for me. And so I was going to turn Dana down anyway, but he called me back and said, hey, I couldn't manage you anyway. There's something coming down the pike. It's going to be big. You're going to want to pay attention. This was going into January 2001. So a couple weeks later, it goes public that Zuffa is born and they bought the brand. And he's the new president. So obviously he's got to hand off Chuck and Tito. He can't manage them and be the president of the entity that they're signed to. So he handed him off to some lawyer that he knew. And he told me when he called me back in December, look, something's coming down. There's no way I can manage you. And I said, okay, that's okay. I'd signed with these guys anyway. Well, these guys, Peter and Jeremy, are from the Hollywood. They're movie people.
Right.
They educated me immediately on this 17-page contract that this new Zuffa company wants me to sign as their heavyweight champion. And I'm like, why would we sign this? And it basically
image and likeness and
educated me on what an ancillary right was and what all these things in this contract were. And they're like, there's no way you should sign this.
And what is it? Like, what was the...
Ancillary rights is my ability to write a book, be in a movie, be in a video game, any of those ancillary things that generate revenue
without their
my own clothing line.
They would take a piece of, or
they would own. I would
have
have to get their permission to do any of those things. If I signed that contract and basically signed the rights in all those categories away to them.
Wow.
And so we fought for those ancillary rights. They shouldn't be able to dictate whether I want to write a book or be in a movie.
Especially as an independent contractor.
As a 1099 employee, they should absolutely own. Any time I walked out of that tunnel and up into that cage, that's the platform that they created. But I'm the commodity.
Yes.
Without the fighter that walks out of that tunnel, there's no show. Most fighters don't look at it that way. They don't see it that way. And until we do, we're going to keep getting raked over the coals. They're going to keep us under 20% income from any single event, which is exactly what they've done. 13 to 15% of the revenue from any single fight goes to the athletes that fought on that card. Show me another professional sport where that's the case. There isn't one.
Because of that, what you just said, what how proud of you, or what conversations did you have with Francis when he was going through his thing?
Everybody assumes that we had some deep conversations about the state of the sport and the issues in the sport, the lack of transparency in the sport, the anti-competitive nature of these contracts in these organizations. But I never talked to Francis about this once. I talked to you a few times because Francis stood up and chirped on his own before I ever had any influence on him,
Right.
or said anything to him. And then I was like, oh my God, okay. And then of course John Jones and Jake Paul and so many other people started filing in behind what was going on. But back in 2006 when I was chirping, back in 2001 when I was fighting them over ancillary rights, nobody else.
Was that when you did the press conference at the gym?
I talked to Dana and Lorenzo both on the phone yesterday. Weren't shouting matches. They weren't degrading in any way. I told them both, I'm not trying to hurt the organization. I'm not trying to burn the house down as it was put to me. I'm simply stating my feeling and where I'm at in this decision and why it was made.
Yeah,
I
that
remember
was
that.
06.
Yeah, 06. Okay.
What was that?
He was giving up his belt, and that was like the Fedor situation.
I was trying to chase the Fedor fight. I mean, as a fighter, he was most of the rankings had him ranked 1 and me ranked 2. I was the UFC champ. He was the Pride champ. So of course, that's the guy I want to fight. If I want to be the best guy in the world, then I got to beat the best guy in the world. And if they think he's the best guy in the world, then let's go.
Yeah.
And I had told Dana and company that, look, this is the fight I want. And there was some other things going on that I knew I wasn't being told the truth about. And I called him out on all of those things. Had a breakfast. I was getting ready. I just fought Gonzaga, broke my arm, was getting ready to go to South Africa and do Scorpion King 2, which was a very big movie for me. And kind of had this breakfast with them 3 weeks before I was supposed to leave for that movie. And set, lay of the land, told him this is the guy I want to fight. This is why. This is what's everything. There was a whole bunch of stuff going on at that time.
Yeah.
And I don't want to dredge all that up, but
Yeah, sure.
Anyway, no response. No, they didn't address any of it. So I changed my phone number and called a press conference at the gym. Kind of blew the whole thing out of the water. The independent contractors agreements, all the way they're controlling these athletes and the issues with our sport at that time. And then left for South Africa with a new phone number so nobody could reach me.
See you later.
So you were sitting heavyweight or light heavyweight champ at that time?
Heavyweight.
Heavyweight champ at that time.
He beat Tim Sylvia,
yeah,
and then
come
defended versus Gonzaga.
Yeah.
Oh,
I'd
okay.
come back to the heavyweight division. I'd lost to Josh Barnett and then Rico, and then was supposed to fight Andrei Arlovsky after that, and that would have been the last fight on my contract. Just coming off 2 losses, we know how that goes. I was ripe for being cut.
Yeah.
And they were going to be happy to finally be rid of my butt, and I agreed to fight Arlovsky, and I had also agreed with my wife at the time, Trish, that she had wanted a kid. She got pregnant and she was due. She would have been due that same night that I was supposed to fight Arlovsky, or my third child in Caden.
Yeah.
So they called me 3 weeks out, said Arlovsky broke his hand. We can't find a replacement on this short of notice. We want to know if you'd be willing to come down to light heavyweight and fight Chuck for the interim championship, because Tito and Chuck can't seem to get on the same page to make that fight happen. So that's how we're going to strip Tito, because he won't fight Chuck. And we want you to put Chuck over, basically. I mean, that's basically what you're telling me.
Right.
You're coming off 2 losses. We want to get rid of you. We think Chuck's going to knock you out and put him over as you're the former heavyweight champ. I mean, I see the writing between the lines.
So it's just stumbled across another belt.
Yeah, right. The story of your career
Didn't go the way they wanted it to go. I was the fly in the ointment yet again.
Yes.
So yeah, that was what was kind of going on.
And that set off probably and to your point.
So now, my son is born. Looks like I'm headed out of the sport. Probably going to just settle into Team Quest, be a coach, and stay home more, and all of that. And then that fight happens, and my career
Kicks off
just
the biggest
skyrockets
trilogy.
again.
Yeah.
And that was the end of my marriage. That's not what she wanted. Now she's going to be on her own, raising this kid a lot. I'm going to be traveling and doing all the crap I'd been doing for the 8 years.
They
prior
kicked
to that.
off Ultimate Fighter right after that.
Yeah, no, exactly. Caden was 2 years old when we were filming that fall.
Is that what kind of brought you to Vegas then? Was the
Yes,
Ultimate Fighter?
exactly
And then,
right. I was there for 90 days just shooting that series.
Yeah, I remember the first time like seeing Randy was at John Lewis's gym. I was a kid.
That's right.
I was a kid,
JSEC.
like JSEC, yeah. And that was like, so John was really the first American black belt in Las Vegas that I can remember at the time. I mean, I was there was no internet back then, you know.
Yeah.
But playing football at Dixie, we'd come home in between, like on the weekends and stuff, and that was the place, Valley View. And
Yep.
What year was this?
2003, 2004.
It was 04.
04, yeah. I mean, there was nothing else out here. So I was a kid, and we'd go out. But
First two guys I met, Mike Pyle and Jay Haran.
over there,
Yep.
Yeah.
At JSEC.
Damn.
crazy.
So then you stumble into a light heavyweight title fight. Kicks off one of the biggest trilogies in the history of the company. Safe to say that changed your career entirely. You think?
Relaunched it for sure.
Yeah.
It looked like I was coming down the other side. You know, I'd lost twice. I'd lost to Josh Barnett. I'd lost to Rico Rodriguez. You know, had one more fight on my contract. They'd set me up against Andre, who was on a tear at that time. It was a fair chance that wasn't going to go my way.
Yeah.
And they'd finally be done with me. And then Andre breaks his hand. They call me and say, hey, would you fight Chuck for the interim championship at light heavyweight? And I had already told them after the two losses, look, I'm not a big heavyweight. I could easily make light heavyweight if there was an opportunity there that you guys see fit.
Yeah.
And sure enough, that's how that.
And that was the first. It wasn't the first fight, but this was the rematch, the first million pay-per-view that they said they did, the million buy pay-per-view.
Might be.
Because I remember
the
them
rematch, because that was after the Ultimate Fighter. That was the
Correct.
caveat to being the
Yes.
coaches in the Ultimate
You
Fighter,
guys
is that
fought.
we had to fight each other.
Right.
As part of that process. And,
Right.
and I certainly had agreed to that. I was just coming off the first win.
Right.
So yeah, I think the fan base more than doubled
Yeah.
through the course of Spike TV and the Ultimate Fighter, and that fight between Forrest Griffin and Stephan Bonner. I mean, come on, we went
man.
from a 0.1 to a 0.6 over the course of a 15-minute fight.
In like
Yeah.
15 minutes.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
That fight changed the landscape for the sport.
Everybody that I knew, everybody would call.
Yeah.
Dude, are you watching this? Like, bro, are you watching Spike TV?
Yeah.
Even if you didn't even know what the Ultimate Fighter was at the time.
Yep.
You know, I started watching in '93, so like a bunch of my friends were all into it.
Yep.
But I mean, guys that never watched a fight in their life were, hey man, did you?
That was
see?
me.
Yeah,
I was in Mississippi at the time. I was probably that was 05 was the finale.
05. Spring of 05.
Spring of 05 was the finale. Yeah, so I was 16, I think, and I remember seeing it on Spike TV, and I was like, these two dudes are beating the shit out of each
yeah,
other.
amazing.
How is this
Exactly
on
right.
live TV for free?
It was amazing. What, like, just really, I think that, and then culminated behind right after with his fight with Chuck.
Yep.
Right. I think just started bringing in more and more mainstream. You know, before people didn't really watch.
And
it.
you were acting at that time too, or you
I
had
had started acting at that time.
You had started,
I had
so
Cradle
that
to the
helped.
Grave was my
That's
first
right.
feature film in
Yeah.
the early 2000s.
Was that's with the
Jet Li
DMX
and DMX,
yeah?
yeah.
How was that? How was working
Me,
with
Chuck,
DMX?
and Tito were all in that movie.
That's
This
crazy.
was back in 03.
Did you have a lot of
03.
interactions with DMX and Jet Li?
I didn't have any scenes with DMX. I had one scene with Jet Li.
Yeah.
I had a fight scene with Jet Li in that movie.
Yeah.
One line, let's go chicken shit. And I was supposed to throw a big right hand at him. And his whole shtick in the movie was he kept his hand in his pocket. He didn't want to fight anybody.
Right.
So I'm supposed to throw a big right hand at him, and he just dodges it. Well, he didn't get out of the way.
Let's go, chicken shit. Not today.
You hit him.
I didn't hit him, thank God, but I ran him over. The director went ape.
Oh,
you know,
man.
here's this big knucklehead just ran over the star of the movie.
Holy
He was
shit.
cool about it. He was laughing. He's like,
Yeah.
"You didn't wind up." I said, "Wind up."
Yeah.
Crazy.
Yeah. Any stories from that first season of Ultimate Fighter you could share, like fun stories that didn't make TV?
That's the thing with the edit. They didn't leave anything out of that season. I mean,
Really?
peeing on the pillow and the girl in the bathroom at the Kid Rock concert. I mean, Levin was the star of that whole
Yeah,
series
he was.
because he was a wild man. Just the nicknames on down the line. They pulled no punches.
Yeah.
And that was an eye opener for me. And I think in some ways, gave me some sense for being in front of a camera and getting comfortable. You forget you're wearing that microphone, and you forget that everywhere you go all day, that whole day, you're on film. And sometimes to your own demise,
Right.
because they can make you look almost any way they want to make you look
Right.
when they go to the edit bay and start ferreting through what they want to,
Right.
you know, what they. And
Did
and
you have a lot of influence on bringing Nate and Lieben on that show at all?
We definitely submitted them
Sure.
as two guys from Team Quest that we thought would be great on that show.
Yeah, they did
And
great.
They were our guys, and then Nate got hurt. That was a learning experience. Putting 3 pairs in a cage to train, and it was too tight. He ended up getting stepped on and twisted his ankle very bad. I talked him into letting me keep him as my assistant coach. Just to keep him on the show. Otherwise, he
Right.
would have been sequestered for the rest of the show and not been able to be
Do
in public.
anything and train
Because,
and-
then they would know he was out.
Right.
And that was a $5 million NDA on that bad boy. You did not mess around with that one. But yeah, it was a crazy experience. First time for me, really kind of being in front of a camera like that.
Right.
And I think in many ways,
Almost like under surveillance.
helped me.
Yeah.
It helped me kind of come to terms when acting took off. And I was already kind of used to that.
So then 06, because when I stepped into Extreme was December of 06, but the gym was never open. You had the keys though, and you're
We had
getting
the
ready
keys,
for
and we
Tim
were doing
Sylvia.
the floors and getting
Yeah.
the equipment and getting all that set up with
Bro,
throwdown.
the one
and
thing
all
I
of that.
remember the most, the one thing that stands out the most to me was they had an F-16 engine pumping heat into this fucking warehouse.
propane, big standing propane heaters.
It was cold, bro. It was December.
was.
Yeah.
And they had the roll door open and I'm like, you walk in and you're like, oh, dude, we're going to die of carbon monoxide poisoning in this thing. Like if they had one of those meters, bro, that thing would have been
Yeah, we
going
were way
off.
over.
Been going off. But yeah, it was so if you down this street here, if you went down Decatur, Sunset never went through.
Yeah, it didn't go under the railroad tracks at that time. That
Oh,
was just
really?
a dead end turnaround right there.
So you had nothing now, and then there was no town square. Las Vegas Boulevard didn't go through. So
There was
we
no
we
bridge
had heard
over the
this
freeway.
rumor, that Randy was opening up this gym, and we were just trying to find it just to sign up and whatever. Bro, it took forever. So we were going down Decatur. You had to make a right on Russell, right on Valley View, right, and then finally
Take all the
just
You had to wind your way back into the industrial complex back
Right.
there, basically. And then all that opened up when they punched that road through.
Yeah.
All of it changed.
Yeah, so there was nothing really over there other than those tile shops or this and that. And
Yeah.
am I in the right place? No
carpentry work,
signage, because that's when you guys had the
Carpenters
other.
Union, all that's kind of right there on
Yeah,
that. On that
and that's
street.
when we had the other building too, the office side, because you're running Natural Link out of there.
I had my corporate office, Natural Couture. I had bought or rented a little suite across the parking lot on the corner
That's
of that
right.
building. And then in 2008, when everything flipped upside down in the real estate world,
Right.
my lease for that little suite was up, and the bushwhacker machine
Next door.
next door that had the other half of the building that we're in now, they were moving to a smaller place. So the whole building came open. And we already knew there was a imprint where that they had been connected at one time. So we're like, man, we'll take over the whole space, give us twice the footprint. I can move my corporate offices in here. It actually saved me rent and saved me money. And everything was upside down in the real estate world at that time anyway. So
Yeah.
everybody was kind of freaking out. And it was a bit of a scary time to make a big adjustment like that, but it actually worked out great and helped us a lot.
And that was a lot of your emphasis to open Extreme was your experiences through I think Team Quest was really, like we talked about, one of the bigger super gyms, but you were getting everything you needed out of Team Quest at that point, right? You weren't going to other places for boxing or jiu-jitsu, really?
I would do that just because I thought that was the right thing to do. To get different perspectives.
Yeah.
I had the first Pedro fight. Immediately they want me to fight him again because they signed him to a 9-fight deal. This was when Dana and company, Zuffa, took over.
9 fights.
That was the first time anybody had ever kicked me.
you.
So I went up to Seattle and started staying with my mom and going to AMC with Matt Hume and Maurice Smith. And I would take Nate Corey or one of the guys with me. and we trained with those guys, and it was an eye opener,
Right.
Because they hardly ever sparred live,
Right.
I was like, how the hell do you get in shape for a fight if nobody's sparring live? It was all tactics and technique, and I learned a ton of new stuff. Matt Hume is the professor for a reason.
Yeah.
Maurice Smith is an amazing teacher and an amazing kickboxing instructor, and he literally changed my stance. I was still in a wrestler stance. That's why I got kicked in that fight against Pedro, and he fixed that and really helped my game a bunch. And I realized that we were going too far the other side of things. We're beating the dog snot out of each other every single day up at Team Quest.
Right.
Every day was a red flag day. There was no easy days there, no technical days, or no situational
Green
days.
light.
Green light.
And it was such a contrast from being at AMC with Matt and how rare they strapped it on and really, really went hard live.
They're still like that, right? 'Cause
And
I've
I
heard-
knew that somewhere in the middle was
Where you
where we
needed.
needed to
Right.
be. We needed to pull back, and they probably needed
to do a little
step
more.
up a little more. But hell, you're not going to tell somebody else's gym that. That was just what I think we learned, and we got better because of going into those other gyms. And we used to go to the JKD gyms all around. Matt Thornton, he had a bunch. He had Salem. That's where I met Robert Paulus and Nate Corey.
That straight blast.
That straight blast in Salem, and then he had another one up on Martin Luther King in Portland. So when me and Danny were in Gresham, we used to go to that Portland one because it was closer.
Yeah.
And then we eventually opened up Team Quest.
And then Dan went to Temecula. You went to Vegas.
I went to Vegas in 2005. The divorce and all that started. Danny eventually left and went down to Temecula and started Team Quest South. And him and Matt kind of got into a rhubarb over franchising the brand and couldn't determine who was going to control the brand. It was Danny and mine. It started with Team Quest. Started with our Performance Quest in the 3rd Street Gym. And all of that, we trademarked all that. We came
but
up
you
with
spelled
the
it
logo.
wrong, so that's what they capitalized on.
Performance Quest. Performance Quest. Left an R off there. What the hell?
That is hilarious.
But they ended up in a rhubarb for a while over the name and the brand, and thankfully, they settled their differences. Team Quest stayed in place. Matt and runs that still up there, and Danny created Team Hendo. And the Temecula brand that still stands for him to this day. So Matt just texted me the other day. He just shot a nice elk up in Oregon. And obviously I just saw Danny at the Tactical Challenge this last week as well with Sean.
Yeah, Strickland.
It was the life of the party, as you can imagine.
I'm sure.
The only guy that Dan calls me one time was like, you don't want this guy in your gym. Dan's never called me about anything.
Right.
He's like, Sean Strickland's going to move to Extreme, and I'm telling you, he's a pain in the ass. He wasn't lying. He wasn't lying.
When they brought you the James Toney fight, did you laugh? Did you
No,
just kind of laugh?
I had already heard the scuttlebutt. And James is a very vocal guy, obviously. It just needed an interpreter to understand him. But he's the only American that ever needed subtitles. I knew James well, actually. He was an Affliction guy. I'd met him a couple of times at some Affliction appearances.
Yeah.
I also knew that he was chattering in Dana's ear about fighting in MMA. And I think financially he needed the money.
Yeah.
Was where that was coming from. And I think they originally were talking to Chuck about that fight. And then they thought, well, Chuck might actually try to stand in front of James Toney.
I was going to say, that's a better fight for Tony.
Right.
Yeah.
Chuck would be a much better
And
fight.
so I think they shifted gears a little and realized that I would probably take a little bit different approach because of my wrestling background. Not that Chuck didn't have that capability.
Right.
It just wasn't Chuck's style.
Yeah.
Right.
And so I ended up getting the call, and I was excited about it.
Yeah.
I saw what was on the line. I think they knew I would approach it and take it seriously and come up with a game plan that was going to take him out of that realm where he had any chance of freaking winning that fight.
So we have you to blame basically for Jake Paul and Ben Askren.
Probably some truth in that statement. But, hey, Jake Paul's no dummy.
He's not.
He
Yeah.
picks
No, we're
the right
fans.
guys
We've
and
talked about him on the show. Like, what he's doing is smart, and he's bringing a lot of eyeballs to
his handlers
a lot of
are
different.
very wise.
Yeah.
And they're not going to let him risk that.
Yeah.
I mean, why would Mike Tyson sign a contract like that to fight to fight Jake Paul. It doesn't do anything
Yeah.
for him, really,
Yeah.
other than pay him $20 million. So he better not knock him out if he wants the $20 million.
What'd you think
that's
of
what
that?
it boiled down to.
Yeah.
What'd you think of that whole not necessarily
Unfortunately,
just
it was what I thought it was.
Yeah.
It was a work.
Yeah.
It wasn't a real fight.
Yeah.
And all these thrillers and crossover matches. The Mayweather Gotti. I went to both of those. I know John Gotti well. He's a good MMA fighter, but he's gonna get a great check fighting Floyd Mayweather in an exhibition. So why not cash that check?
For sure.
But they're not real fights.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Has there ever been one that you thought was actually like a real fight? I think of like Mayweather and McGregor.
Well,
But,
I thought Francis and Tyson Fury was a real fight,
Yeah.
but I don't think Tyson took it seriously till
Yeah.
Francis knocked him on his ass in the
Yeah.
third round.
Exactly.
And then he realized, oh, hell.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah, I feel like we were talking about this the other day, Eric and I feel like, there's a lot of new fans with the UFC, right? Like COVID helped them tremendously, like going through COVID, they gained a bunch of new fans. But I feel like a lot of the history is not necessarily, revisited quite, a bit.
The way it
And
should be.
The
They
way it
wanna
should be.
whitewash things.
Of
They always
course,
do.
especially with guys like you, Francis, others. But I feel like no one knows that you fought James Toney, who was like an iconic boxer. He's fought everybody. He was a champion.
6-time world champion.
Yeah, he
boxing,
fought
I
Roy
believe,
Jones.
and-
He fought everybody.
His shoulder roll left hook is as good as anybody's in
Yeah.
the sports. I took him very,
Very
very
serious,
seriously.
yeah.
And that was also the first time that little voice in my head started chattering, hey, maybe it's time to think about doing something else.
Really?
Because I had every old injury I'd ever had in the sport of wrestling or fighting flare up in that camp.
Really?
For no particular reason. And that's the first time that internal dialogue ever said, hey, maybe that's your body telling you it's time to do something else.
Wow.
And I think once that dialogue starts, if you don't shut that down right away, you need to take it seriously. You need to really consider what
Yeah.
you're doing. It's a tough way to make a living, getting
Yeah.
punched in the face.
Yeah.
And that's the first time I ever kind of, had that kind of conversation with myself was during that camp with James.
So I want to back up. So Tim Sylvia, probably one of the best game plans you've, literally laid out to go pick this guy apart. The cut kick to the overhand, getting in on would you single leg him?
Yeah.
High crotch.
It was a high single.
Yeah.
I used
That was
the
when
high
you won at
single
40
against Gonzaga again
Yeah.
after,
Yeah.
43, right?
Yeah, we had that new Muay Thai guy. And, gosh, he came from Legends in L.A.
Yeah.
And I didn't realize it at the time, but he had an addiction issue. And he kept that under wraps, obviously. And there were some other things that went on with him. But I'd started training with him, was learning new things about Muay Thai. And then later that got taken a lot further with Quinton Chong.
Right.
Quinton came and stayed with us. But he had just come to the gym. He wasn't with us very long. But he was with me in that camp. And that little inside kick to break Tim's balance, the overhand right to the left hook was you always come up with that first contact to get things moving your way. After that, it's action reaction. You don't have time to think. If you thought about that opportunity to execute that technique, that passed, and you missed it.
Right.
So, but you want to get that first contact out of the way and get things going in your direction. And so that was what that was. I practiced that specific combination over and over and over the whole camp. And then it worked like a charm. I was as surprised as anybody when he fell.
I was going to say, were you
my
shocked
God.
when you connected?
Yes.
And was like, wait.
I was like, holy cow. I felt like a redwood. It was just
Crazy. And that's kind of like when I started to understand your topside half guard mentality, killing the bottom leg. It was always like, I think when you start this journey, jiu-jitsu is always going to be a base, but then jiu-jitsu is always based off of a point system, passing to side control, get points, mount, this, where he was isolating legs, being effective to get topside ground and pound on guys. And I think that's kind of where the culture shift happened, where guys really started to understand the nuances of ground and pound was really through him and a lot of that fight in particular.
Yeah, it was like riding a barrel. He was so big.
Really?
In his guard, I couldn't reach his head, but he could still reach my head because he was so long.
Yeah, was he
His
like
guard.
6'10" or
That
something?
means I had to stack up.
He was big.
He was
Dude.
huge, right?
6'8".
6'8".
Yeah.
He walks around at 290.
And a lot of people don't know this. So Randy beats Gonzaga, right? Gonzaga comes to our gym and trains with us for like a year, maybe after that. And that's when I think a lot of us in the room, myself especially, we realized like how fucking good Randy was, because here's Gabe Gonzaga just mauling everybody in the gym. And remember, like, Randy was supposed to fight Crow Cop. That was supposed to be the fight.
Yeah.
And that was when you were commentating for Fox.
It was at O2 Arena in the UK. And I was commentating that fight, and I had the winner, whoever won that fight. Well, Gonzaga booted him in the head and folded him up like a cheap lawn chair. I mean, that was ridiculous.
Out of nowhere.
Yeah.
Right? So
His
now,
leg folded back behind him. And
oh, bro,
my
nasty.
gosh,
It was
that
nasty.
gnarly.
Nasty.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then so he fights Gonzaga, and then tell him, like, was the first round you broke your arm?
Third. Start of the third. Came out, hit him with a left hook, and closed the distance. Got to the clinch, was working elbows, shoulder bumping and knee bumping and ripping elbows and fists through, and then hit him in a high single. Picked him up, and when he hit the ground, his own knee came down and smashed him right in the nose and just shattered his nose. Ooh. And then blood everywhere the rest of the fight. And then second round was more of the same. He came out in the third, tried to kick me in the head. The first 10 seconds of the fight, I had one hand up. I didn't get them both X'd over, and I felt it. I mean, but I still got to the clinch. And now I've got him in the clinch, and I can feel it clicking. But I'm like, maybe it's just a bruise.
Just a flesh wound.
And I trip him and take him down and get good cross-side position and pound him out. And the fight was over. So I'm thinking, I got to do an appearance across. That was at MGM and at New York. I'm supposed to do a signing over there after this fight. And I'm thinking, well, I had the doc look at it. He said, well, maybe it's just a bruise, Yeah. And doing the autograph signing, and by the end of the autograph signing, my hand was just black and blue and swollen. I'm like, nope, that's broke. That's when I'm supposed to leave for Scorpion King for this big movie in South Africa. And I called the press conference, all that stuff happened in the next 3 weeks with the splint. Yeah, it was wild.
Dang. Do you usually will ask like other fighters or ex-fighters we have on here, like, what was your welcome to the UFC moment? But you kind of like built it with the company from the ground up. So was there ever just a what the fuck am I doing moment in throughout your career? Like one you can vividly remember?
Yeah, that first time, for sure.
Yeah.
Like, first of all, seeing these two guys on the scale in the Holiday Inn lobby, because that's where we weighed in that night.
Right. The Holiday Inn lobby.
They're both giants. I mean, they were both huge guys.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh my God, what did I get myself into here? And then I'm laying in my locker room because you show up early.
Yeah.
And especially then, it was a tournament format, so you weren't sure where you were going to fall in the tournament. Plus, they were running two tournaments. They had the heavyweight tournament that I was fighting in, and the light heavyweight tournament that Tito was fighting in, and Metzger and all those guys. So there was two big tournaments going on that night. We're there early. I've gone to all my med checks and stuff with the commission. I'm sleeping in the locker room. I got a towel over my eyes, and hear this screaming and this pounding. Boom, boom, boom. Oh, it's Coleman. And I'm like, what the hell is going to pull the towel from my? Here's Coleman, the king of ground and pound.
Yeah.
And he's cornering Royce Alger. We're still 2.5 hours from the first fight.
Yeah.
And he's pounding his head into the locker, trying to get Royce Alger fired up for his fight. I'm like, guys, what are you doing? We still got 2.5 hours yet.
What an animal.
It was wild. But this was I'm like, what the hell? Where am I at right now?
How did I get here? How did I stumble into this again? What do you make of like the product today? Like when you watch fights, what do you just make of like the overall, UFC product or MMA product, you could say as a whole, but mainly UFC? I'd love to get your thoughts because there's like this debate online right now. I don't know if you see like on Twitter where, half the people will say it's kind of watered down. It's not as good as it once was. And the other half will say it's on fire. It's never been better. So I kind of want to know where you fall.
I think they're not taking the time. It's a puppy mill now.
Yeah.
They're just pumping out fights and fighters, and they'll cut you in a second, and because there's another guy right there that's going to sign that same crappy contract and happy to do that and be in that show. They don't take the time to do the vignettes and the behind-the-scenes stuff and build stars like they used to. I felt like I kind of enjoyed that golden age or era of the fight game where they took that time and built those stars and showed you that behind-the-scenes stuff that made you kind of understand how that guy ticks and why he wants to walk up in a cage and get punched in the face for a living. And I think they've kind of strayed away from that. They don't do that so much anymore. And I think that's why the fan base grew the way it did. Building those stars and telling those stories, that's the martial arts part of what we do.
Yeah.
And I think what the fans like to see. So, that in some ways, Takedown and being bought out by WME and now merging with the WWE, or I think they create a gray area. Was that a work or was that a real fight?
I haven't heard
Especially
that.
now with the Trillers, with these boxing exhibitions. We just saw that female fight the other night.
Oh,
Tyson and Paul.
Taylor.
Oh, Taylor Serrano.
Yeah.
And a great fight. Both those gals put it on, and were probably the fight of the night.
Right,
But
100%.
that decision, how does that happen?
Yeah,
107 more
yeah.
punches and a point taken for a clash of heads, and you win by 1 point.
Right.
And again, one of those disparaging decisions that disenchant people with boxing, and why the door was open for MMA to flourish and grow the way it has.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's the truth.
How many superstars do you think that there are today?
I think
Because
they're
your day it was like you could name Chuck, Randy, Tito,
Yeah.
boom, boom. You could
Yeah.
name them. How many today? Like actual superstars.
probably, I mean, right now everybody's talking about Pereira. Chandler just coming off, and obviously even still coming off the loss. But I think Chandler's still one of those guys that's still got a
Moves the
marquee
needle.
name and
Yeah,
moves the needle.
That's what I'm just interested.
Yeah.
Like who you think maybe
You know,
moves the needle?
McGregor's scratching and clawing to stay relevant, and I don't think he's going to walk back up in there, honestly. He's got more money he can probably spend, but he'll probably make a run at it.
Yeah.
It's hard to say, but
Yeah.
Sean's up there, man. It's crazy because
Sean
the
moves the
reason
needle
why
for
I
sure.
say it is like when we're out,
Yeah.
right? Like when you go out in public, you're like, oh, bro, Francis the same way.
Yeah.
And this is
Obviously.
the kind of stuff that Dana tends to reward. Why Conor became such a huge star, because he was willing to do the publicity stunts
Right.
and run his mouth and
Yeah.
generate that kind of heat and that. That's the kind of stuff that Dana rewards, and Sean kind of does that inherently just because
Yeah,
of his
no matter what.
personality.
Right.
I'm sure he makes Dana cringe sometimes too, but
Sure, he
at the
makes
end of the day, he's saying what a lot of people are thinking.
Yeah,
he,
true.
He opens
Yeah.
his mouth, and he may not have a lot of tact when he does it, but he's saying what a lot of people are already thinking and just not willing to say.
He's
Yeah.
definitely a throwback, though. Like, he's a guy that really fit, I think, the early stages of Extreme Couture.
I mean, how is that any different than Joe Rogan?
Right.
Rogan was willing to say things that not a lot of other people were
People
willing to
say,
say back in
yeah.
the day, and
Yeah.
that's what, in some ways, got him the popularity that he enjoys right now, because he has a little more tact when
Right,
he does it.
does
but,
it. Oh,
but
boy.
he's still a polarizing guy.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. What is the gym like today? Like, obviously, you started it way back 16 years ago. What's the gym like today? What's the state of the gym? How does Eric, what are your thoughts on how Eric and company run the gym, and how's it doing?
The gym is flourishing. Up for Gym of the Year for the 4th year running, Coach of the Year for the 3rd or 4th year running. And in 2020, I signed the gym over to Ryan.
Yeah.
Ryan wanted to retire from fighting and start his family and kind of settle into that part of his life. And I knew at some point that would be his, when he left the bank job to come manage a gym for me. And then, 4 months into that, I was like, Dad, I really kind of want to fight. Oh, my God. Okay. So, here we are,
Yeah.
12 plus years later, and I knew at some point it would be his. And changing the logo, remodeling, the team coming back online, brought Dennis Davis in. When I stepped out, the gym went through a lull. A lot of the guys scattered to the wind to go other places. I wasn't grinding out camps anymore.
Right.
Sean Tompkins had just passed away. Brought Dennis Davis in, was trying to do my best to put Dennis over. But the guys, he was fresh out of fighting and wasn't like he was a multi-time world champ at that level. He was just a solid, great performer and a great martial artist. So trying to put him over with the team wasn't going very well, honestly. He didn't, he felt a little out of place. And then Follis kind of moved back to the area. And here's somebody we both knew well. Obviously, Dennis, he was one of Dennis's mentors. So Dennis literally gave up a big piece of his pay to get Flawless to come in and
Yep.
be part of the staff at Extreme.
Yeah.
And, Robert and I had a little falling out after the divorce when I left Team Quest. We made up in Minnesota. He was there cornering. He hadn't moved here yet, but he was there cornering somebody else, and I was commentating at those fights in Minnesota. And after the fights at the bar in the hotel, we kind of made amends and kind of got back on the same page. He apologized. He was going through a divorce with Willow. He had never experienced that, and then realized kind of the flaw in his thinking when he kind of lashed out at me when I was going through the divorce with Trish.
Right.
So we kind of got back on the same page. And it was a year and a half later, I think, that this was all going on with Dennis. And Dennis like, hey, can I bring him back in here? And, I think we need him. And I'm like, yeah, man, we just have to figure out how to get him paid and get, make him happy. And so Dennis literally gave up some of his pay to make that happen.
Wow.
This is around the same time the Pernille was leaving and the management opening was, and I had no idea. He'd been with us for a while, but I had no idea he was interested in that. I knew he was, managing the Irish bar across the way and was certainly capable of the nuts and bolts of that. But I didn't have any idea that you were even interested.
Yeah.
And so we opened the position up. Pernille was, getting ready to pop. She was going to have the
No,
baby,
it was
the
John.
first baby.
John Hahn.
Was John?
Yeah, I backed up John.
I'm crossing my wires.
Yeah.
It all kind of overlaps. But
Because John came right on after Pernille.
John was kind of one of the first to ever do the job right and really hold people accountable and get us
100%.
into the black for the
Yeah.
first time.
Yeah.
But everybody hated John. John was a hard ass,
Yeah.
FBI Marine,
Right.
that literally made people toe the line, and certainly fighters don't want
He
that.
had a hard time, I think, with his transition because he was one of the boys. And then the day he got hired as the gym manager, I'll never forget this, showed up with a tie, and they were like, but dude, we're just out with you the night before.
But he just flipped the switch.
But flipped the switch, and it was like he wasn't one of the fellas anymore. It was his approach, and I think that it rubbed a lot of the guys the wrong way.
Yeah.
So for me, when that job was offered to me, I remember, and John was a great influence for me in that transition. He's like, man, a lot of people that you think that you're friends, you're going to lose a lot of friends essentially, because you're going to have to try to do a job that you're going to piss some people off. So it was hard for me to kind of find that balance. But the thing that helped me the most was when John got that job, he locked himself in the office and was just crunching numbers the whole time, but lost the pulse of what was going on the floor, right? And I'm like, I don't ever want to change that. I can do both, but I'm not going to spend wasted time in the office doing shit that's not going to matter. I want to be on the mats knowing what the customer needs, what the fighter needs, what's going on front lines to how to grow this thing. But that's literally... I called him and said, dude, let's go get a beer and let me know, like, what do you want from this gym? At the time, we were kind of in that, well, how are we going to grow this thing? What do you want to do? And I never forget this. So we went to like Tommy Bahamas or something. And I was like, boss, like, what do you want to do with this place? He goes, I want to win some fucking world titles. And I'm like, awesome. Like, that's what I wanted to hear.
Yeah.
Right. And then eventually, I want to give this gym over to my son. And I remember looking at him, I go, do you want to give him an asset or a liability? He said, of course, an asset. So let's start growing this thing and building it right. And that's kind of when we sat down and talked about bringing Flawless over. And he's right. Like literally myself and Dennis gave away a bunch of classes to get Robert on. But there was a cultural shift when you brought Robert on, right? And like kind of a Tony Robbins guy,
Yeah,
right?
he is absolutely a disciple of Tony Robbins. He was one of these guys that motivated. A lot of folks just loved the energy that he brought, the positivity. He had an aura like a Tony Robbins, and he brought Misha. I mean, which we want champions
our
in there,
world
right?
title.
So it's certainly in. She was at the top of her game, or coming into the top of her game at that time.
Yeah.
So, and that was that swung things for
Yeah.
sure.
It was a standard that I remember that meeting that we first had with Robert. It was a question that he posed. And the guys that remained on the team that were still there was Campman, Dunham, there's a handful of guys. But the question that he posed was, what do you guys want to do? How do you guys want? And we all answered the right thing. He said, great, I'm glad to hear you guys say this. Here's the standard that we should set as a team. It wasn't his standard. It wasn't, this is what you guys are going to do. but you guys have all agreed upon you want to win world titles, you want to do this, want to do this, want to do this. Well, here's the standard that we set for each other, right? And then that started to really just the small little things, the simple things, right? Started to build into showing up on time, having tape, having, you know?
Yeah.
He brought the structure in that way.
He established boundaries is basically what it was. Guys were willy-nilly and showing up whenever they wanted. We're in the middle of first sessions and warm up and whatever, and guys show up late, and that's disrespectful.
Yeah.
And he had those boundaries and set those boundaries that allowed the team to come together with a commonality. High tide raises all ships, burn the boats. All these things kind of came out of that period, and the gym started to flourish again.
Yeah. Do you still get on the mats even today a little bit, or
once in a while here and there, especially Wednesdays because it's wrestling day, and I feel like that's the one area where I can contribute, especially with the Greco background that a lot of other folks got exposed to.
No more heart attacks. Knock on
better
wood.
Strikers and better submission guys. No more.
I said no more heart attacks. Knock on wood. Walk into the hospital.
I think we're done with that.
Gee, what was that story like?
Bro,
yeah,
Ryan and I are in my office. He gets a call. I think from Mindy, maybe, I don't know, somebody, but dude, I can see him kind of panic, and he goes, Dad just had a heart attack. And I'm like, what? He okay? And he's like, I don't know, but I'm going to get out there. I'm going to get to, he was in LA.
Yeah.
And then I was like, okay, let me know what's going on. Did he drive or fly? Whatever. So I'm not even joking. It might've been an hour and a half goes by. I get a call from Randy.
Yeah.
Hey boss, what's up? And he's like, hey, Unbreakable is getting rid of all their gear or all their Sornex equipment. They got about $10,000-$15,000 worth of Sornex equipment. We got to get a U-Haul down here and get. You remember this? And get all this shit out of there. Da da da. And I'm like, yo, you good?
Didn't you just have a heart attack?
Did you just have a fucking heart attack? And he's like, yeah, well, I mean, it was about 10 grand worth of Sornex gear. We got to get that shit out of the fucking. I'm like, bro, we'll get the Sornex gear.
Yeah.
Worry about your heart attack.
Focus on your heart, please.
No idea I was having a heart attack.
Just walked to the hospital because you felt something.
Yeah, I was at Unbreakable. I was in LA shooting Outlaw Johnny Black with Michael Jai White. Shot Monday. Had Tuesday and Wednesday off, didn't have to be back on set till Thursday. So I went to Unbreakable to get a workout in.
Yeah.
Same circuit I'm doing all the time. I'm in the middle of this circuit, and I get this weird ache in my chest. You know, I popped my ribs plenty of times. So I'm like, how the hell did I pop a rib in this workout? And I can't get this ache to go away. It just wraps around my back. So I've got a foam roller. I'm trying to roll
out his heart attack.
I drink a post-workout drink, which is part of the deal at Unbreakable, and immediately puke it up in the trash can. And I'm like, what the hell's going on? I've never been that puker, that person. So that's a big red flag for me. It's like, well, I must be getting sick or something. This ain't right. But this weird ache still won't go away. So we change clothes, and I drive down the hill to the condo. Literally drive right past Cedar Sinai to get to the condo. And park, and Mindy's like, I'm going to start my car. We just get into the condo. She hadn't started her car in a while. It was parked there. So I'm going upstairs to lay down. This freaking ache won't stop. And so I go up and lay on the bed. And she comes back up 5 minutes later. So, the car started fine, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, babe, something ain't right. This ache won't go away. It's really weird. Something's just not right. Let's walk over to the emergency room. So we literally walked the 3 blocks over to Cedar Sinai. I had just driven by it and walk in. Place is packed.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I'm having weird chest pain. I don't know what I've done. Okay, and we'll have a seat. We'll get right to you. 10 minutes go by. They call my name. This crackhead tries to kick me in the face when I stand up. I'm like, the hell, hey, whoa. And they hooked me up to the EKG, and you'd have thought it was NASCAR, man. Immediately just freak out, start cutting my clothes off, getting me on a gurney. Mindy's eyes are this big. She's sure they're ripping
AFib
me
or something.
I'm having a full-blown heart attack.
Fucking crazy.
So they wheel me up to the cath lab, go in through my wrist and suck out this clot in my diagonal artery, widowmaker, and then put a stent in there. And they're like, I don't know what to do with you. Obviously, it's not a lifestyle issue. It's a genetic issue. You have polycythemia. You have very thick blood. I already knew that. But what I didn't realize was at 55, my testosterone was down to 170. I did my colonoscopy and all these checkups that I hadn't done in 7 or 8 years since I retired from fighting. And at 47, I'm 55 now. I hadn't done any of those annual checkups or any of that stuff. I didn't even have a general practitioner anymore. So I got a new doctor, Dr. Alfreda, you know Dr. Alfreda, and he's like, man, and he did a blood chem panel on me. He's like, bro, your testosterone is pretty damn low. It's down at 170. Do you want to start TRT? And I was like, well, I don't get tested anymore, so I can do that.
Hell yeah.
So I started the TRT, not really realizing that the side effect to the TRT is thick blood. I'm already at the top of normal. So that TRT pushed me way over normal, and they think that could have been a contributing factor to the heart attack.
Trying to foam roll out a heart attack is crazy.
Captain America.
That's insane. I guess we can kind of end on this. Just what do you have coming up? I know PFL is this next week. You're out in Riyadh again.
Yeah, back to Riyadh. Excited about that. The finals. There's some amazing matchups. Obviously, Dakota Ditcheva and Brendan Loughnane out of Manchester have taken the sport by storm in many ways, and Dakota coming into her first championship win. Brendan looking for his second. Impa Kasanganay again. That amazing fight in the champs versus champs against Johnny Eblen.
Yeah, it was a great fight.
Actually, Murdov is no slouch. It's guys from Turkmenistan. It's going to be a very interesting fight at light heavyweight. Goltsov finally, against Supanov. That's going to be
the heavyweight
match. Yeah.
Do you think one of those guys can be the next to fight Francis? Francis and I were talking about this on Friday.
I think if Goltsov doesn't win,
right?
I don't know if Goltsov will be the guy to fight Francis, just because he's been hit or miss.
I agree.
And this guy's, looks unstoppable.
Right.
Goltsov's amazing. He just sometimes doesn't show up. It's kind of really
I agree. It's crazy. Like talent-wise, he's unreal.
Ridiculous. And
Does
Ezekiel chokes. And I mean, he's a ridiculously talented guy. I love watching him fight, but sometimes there's been a time or two he just didn't show up.
Right. I agree.
I know Francis at one point years ago when we first went to a PFL match, he had his eye on Henin. And then the guy from Czech Republic, I think it is,
Antilia.
Yeah. Is he still
Delias?
Delias. He's really good. He's not in the final, but he's still under the PFL banner, correct?
He's still under the PFL banner.
Because that was a guy Francis had his eye on, I remember, for a while.
He's not in this season this year. Maybe he'll be back next year. So I'd say I've been impressed with him.
Yeah.
He's been a champ for us. He lost to Bruno Capolosa, and then the next year he came back and won it himself. So he was a solid performer and one of Crow Cop's guys. He's a good one.
Dakota also fighting Talia Santos, right? Who arguably beat Valentina,
correct,
in their title fight. So that's a good test.
That's a very interesting matchup, and that's going to be a very, very good fight. I don't think anybody thought that Dakota was going to get through Jenna Bishop. Certainly not the way she did. And especially when Jenna had her back in the first round. I'm like, oh man, this might be over.
World-class jiu-jitsu player,
And Dakota's just been impressive in her ability to survive some of those horrible situations for a Muay Thai striker and get where she needs to be.
We got Jeremy Kennedy on that card as well.
Yep.
He's fighting Pineda.
That's right.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Jesus is
he's good.
He come out of the 2023 season from the Challenger Series all the way through and just wrecked guys.
Including
Brendan Loughnane, who was the champ in 2023.
And Bubba, that's right.
He stormed the castle on Bubba, and Bubba never recovered.
Exactly.
I
I remember Dewey talking about that fight in Riyadh. He was like, this dude's dangerous.
This dude's dangerous. Just plods forward.
Anything else you want to touch on?
Man, nothing, but I'm just pumped to have him here. Like just talking, there's like one episode's not enough.
No, I text when Eric told me
so much good stuff with Randy. And but I mean, obviously I can't thank you enough, not only for being here, but just for everything, man. You've always been a huge mentor to me, a big brother, a guy who really took a chance on me and put me in the position that I'm at today. I can't thank you enough for everything. I mean, obviously you're my family. Love you to death, man.
There it is, right there, brother. Part of the family.
Yep, 100%.
That's what it's supposed to be, and you've helped amass and garner that culture in the gym, that family mentality. That's absolutely what you brought to the table.
There was nothing better than being there, literally since day one and just seeing the culture that you wanted to set and then being able to take that ideologies and put it in the gym today, and just knowing that like we're a part of that lineage of even back with Team Quest, you know, with Robert, with Linlin, with Dan, with guys that like I looked up to, and then mostly yourself, but just keeping that tradition on of that head down and grind mentality, check your ego at the door, you know, and keep that carrying on for the next generation.
Yeah, that's all about.
Awesome. We're so thankful to have you. So lucky to have you. When Eric said you were coming on, I said, one episode's not enough. You've lived 9 lives. You've lived 9 different lives. We could do a whole episode on Hollywood. We didn't even touch on Hollywood.
I I've lived 8 of my 9 for sure. Yeah. I'm in the last one now.
Yeah.
Well, we really appreciate it again. Thank you so much for kicking off season 2 with us here. And hopefully we could do it again.
You bet. My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. That does it for today's episode of Verse Us with Eric Nicksick. Make sure you like and subscribe on YouTube. Leave us a comment on future guests you want to see or just questions you have for the show. Also, make sure you subscribe on Spotify, Apple Music, Google Play, anywhere you get your podcast. And make sure you follow Verse Us on social media at VSUS Pod. For Eric and Captain America, Randy Couture, and myself, we'll see you guys next time. Cool.